my sister's wedding, they handed me nothing but a dry piece of bread. My mom sneered, "That's all you're worth." My sister smirked, pathetic as usual. When speeches began, I grabbed the mic. "Let's show something special." The screen lit up. Her face turned pale. "Turn it off," she screamed. 200 guests sat frozen. "Oh, you guys. You are not going to believe this. Imagine this. You're at a 5-star wedding, the kind where every crystal chandelier screams old money. But you get a single dry piece of bread. That's it." That's all they thought I deserved. My own mother, pearls gleaming around her neck, leaned over and whispered, with a smile that was pure poison, "This is enough for you, my sister." And my sister, the glowing bride, in her designer heels, just glanced at my lonely table and hissed, "Pathetic." In that moment, I had a choice. Walk out quietly, cry in the bathroom like they always expected me to, or remind them exactly who they were dealing with. So I waited, through the endless ceremony, through all the fake speeches about love and unity. And when the mic was passed around, I stood up, calm as you please, and said, "Let's watch something special, shall we?" The lights dimmed, the screen lit up, and with one click, their perfect world began to absolutely crumble. What played wasn't just a video, it was a confession, a betrayal, a secret they thought I'd never, ever discover. My sister's hands started shaking. My mother gasped. The groom froze. The guests stared. And the next 3 minutes, they changed everything. You think this is just another family drama? No. This is the raw, unvarnished truth behind a perfect wedding. And what happens when the quiet one decides she's not going to stay quiet anymore? Stay with me because this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And trust me, it's only just getting started. My name is Iris Whitmore. I'm 38, and for the last 10 years, I've lived alone in a modest 3rd-floor apartment in Brooklyn. I'm a photographer, but not the glamorous kind, no fashion shoots or society weddings for me. I'm a quiet observer of life. My lens searches for truth in the everyday. Wrinkled hands holding coffee cups, eyes that have seen too much, children laughing, worn-out sneakers. It's not flashy work, but it's honest. And in a world obsessed with appearances, I've learned to find dignity in that honesty. I rarely talked about my family. Not because of some angry fight, but because silence was always more bearable than the judgment I knew too well. That afternoon, I was in my small studio editing a portrait of an elderly couple married 50 years. The soft winter light spilled through the window, but my mind drifted, not to the warmth of their love, but to a photo that didn't exist, my own family portrait. See, I was always the other daughter, the one who didn't have Delaney's perfect jawline or her effortless charm with strangers. While Delaney posed for pageant photos, basking in applause at ballet recitals, I watched from backstage. Sometimes I'd hold her flowers, but more often I was just forgotten. My mother, Evelyn, used to say, "Delaney was born to shine. Iris, dear, you're more of a shadow. Necessary, but best when quiet." Even as a child, I knew exactly what that meant. I remember my 10th birthday. I waited with wide eyes and a party hat in the little park my mom told me to go to. No one came. I waited over an hour before realizing Evelyn had taken Delaney to a modeling audition across town, completely forgetting my picnic. I walked home alone that day, holding untouched cupcakes in my lap on the subway. Years later, high school graduation. I wore a borrowed white dress, scanning the crowd after the ceremony. Parents laughed, cried, hugged their kids, handed them roses. I stood alone on the curb until my friend Julie's dad offered me a ride home. Evelyn and Reginald never came. They were at Delaney's magazine photo shoot instead. "We thought your graduation was tomorrow," Evelyn had explained later, with that thin, dismissive smile, as if that erased the aching absence. Now, sitting there, staring at the half-finished photo on my screen, I got up and walked to the hallway. My parents' Christmas card from last year still hung on the bulletin board. Evelyn and Reginald smiling. Delaney and her fiancé Jasper perched in front of a grand fireplace, all coordinated in cream and navy. I wasn't in the photo. I never had been. Not in any of their holiday greetings sent out over the years. There were no raised voices in the Whitmore house, no slamming doors or dramatic exits. Our exclusion was polite, intentional, and chillingly consistent. Evelyn believed in decorum above all else. If I didn't fit the narrative she wanted to present to the world, I was edited out gently but thoroughly. My father, Reginald, never protested. He was a man of few words, preferring evenings with newspapers and investor calls. When he did speak, his words had the cold, clinical tone of a boardroom. Delaney, for her part, was never outright cruel like kids sometimes are. She didn't mock me or fight with me. She just ignored me. As if I existed in a parallel orbit, close enough to be seen, but too insignificant to affect her world. The only photos I had of us together were from early childhood, before she learned she could be the center of attention without sharing the frame. That afternoon, I opened my closet and took down a small box of prints I'd never shown anyone. One by one, I pulled out snapshots from our family home. The edge of a kitchen table where Evelyn sat sipping wine. The empty hallway outside Reginald's office. Delaney's pageant crown glinting on a windowsill. None of them were portraits. They were observations. Quiet, distant, but hauntingly intimate. It was my way of remembering what it felt like to be there and never truly be seen. I set the box down and looked at my calendar. A red circle around Saturday. Delaney's wedding. I hadn't decided whether to go. The envelope had arrived a week earlier. Thick paper, gold lettering, addressed not as Dear Sister or even Iris Whitmore, but to Ms. Iris Whitmore. No note inside, no phone call, just the invitation. A silent reminder. You are still not really part of this family, but your absence would be noticed, and that would be inconvenient. I stared at it, still lying open on my desk. The rational part of me wanted to stay home, avoid the whole theater of it all. But another part, deeper, quieter, and long ignored, stirred. Maybe it was time to show up. Not for them, for myself. A few days later, another impossibly elegant, thick envelope arrived. I knew it was from Delaney. That gold-embossed monogram, D&J, with a swirling flourish that looked straight out of a luxury perfume ad. She always had a flair for drama, even in paper. I opened it. The card inside was stiff, pristine, printed on ivory with foil-stamped gold lettering. The Whitmore and Langston families cordially invite you to celebrate the wedding of Delaney Marie Whitmore and Jasper Elliott Langston. The ceremony at the historic Baystone Grand Hotel in Boston. Reception in the Versailles Ballroom. Black tie. Champagne only. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. It was the kind of breath that escapes not from surprise, but from something much deeper, resignation. Of course, it would be the Baystone. That place was practically a shrine for Boston's upper class, where every marble tile and gold-trimmed chair screamed legacy. And of course, it would be Jasper. The Langstons were old money, generations of polished teeth and silent power. Delaney always knew how to climb. She just made sure her heels never touched the ground. My phone rang within minutes. It was Evelyn. Iris. My mother's voice came through, smooth and clipped. I assume you received the invitation? I did. Well, then please try to dress appropriately this time. It's a formal wedding, not a gallery opening. I let the silence stretch before answering. You don't have to worry. I'll blend right in with the wallpaper. Evelyn didn't laugh. She never did at sarcasm that didn't serve her. Delaney's wedding is an important event for our family. The Langstons are not people we want to offend. I'm not the one marrying into their family, I replied, more quietly than I intended. You're still representing us, just don't embarrass anyone, and no denim this time. I almost reminded her that I had worn denim only once, and that had been after a 10-hour train ride to make it in time for Christmas dinner. But what was the point? Evelyn had already ended the call. Later that afternoon, while sorting through prints for a client, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Delaney. The tone, as always, was breezy, an effortless mix of warmth and passive command. Hey sis, so excited you're coming. Quick favor, would you mind snapping a few pics during the reception? Nothing fancy, just candid moments. You know, you've got the best eye. And we figured since you're family, it'd be super meaningful. And free, of course. Haha. I stared at the screen. I could almost hear the way Delaney's voice would rise slightly on the word free, as though it was a joke, as though it wasn't entirely expected. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, I considered declining outright, but I knew what that would trigger. A call from Evelyn, a passive-aggressive tirade about selfishness, about how I never do anything for my sister, even though she's always included you. It would turn into a conversation I'd already played out in my mind 100 times. So, I replied politely, but firmly. I appreciate the thought, but I'd like to attend as a guest this time. Delaney never responded. That evening, the sun dipped below the Brooklyn skyline in a wash of amber and steel. I was pouring tea when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Miss Whitmore, this is Sylvia Renair's assistant. I'm calling on behalf of Clarion Gallery. My heart skipped. We're pleased to inform you that your work has been selected for our spring showcase, Portraits of Solitude. Sylvia loved your submissions. She said, "Your eye is unflinching." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had submitted that series almost a year ago. Intimate, raw portraits of people caught in quiet reflection. It had felt like a long shot, something I did more for myself than for recognition. And now, out of nowhere, an invitation. Thank you, I managed, my voice barely steady. That's incredible. You'll be receiving the formal confirmation by email, but Miss Renair said to let you know personally. She believes you have something rare. When the call ended, I stood still in the center of my apartment, hand pressed against my chest, as though trying to keep the moment inside me. I picked up my phone and, despite myself, called my mother. It rang 3 times before Evelyn answered. Hello? Hi, Mom, I said. I just wanted to share something. I got accepted into Clarion's spring show. Sylvia Renair herself chose my work. There was a pause, just long enough to leave a bruise. That's nice, Iris. Listen, I'm in the middle of finalizing some seating plans for the wedding. Can we talk later? The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, then placed it down without a sound. A golden wedding, a golden opportunity. 2 invitations, one handwritten in art and effort, the other mass-printed and sealed in silence. I knew which one mattered more. The Baystone Grand gleamed beneath the pale winter sky, its towering facade flanked with white columns and gold-trimmed doors that glinted in the morning sun. I stepped out of the hired town car, my emerald green dress brushing against my calves, as a cold gust swept through the hotel courtyard. The dress was modest. No sequins, no lace, just clean lines and quiet elegance like everything I chose. I adjusted the strap of my purse, steadying myself before walking through the ornate revolving doors. Inside, guests milled about the cathedral-style lobby, all dressed in layers of wealth. Men in tuxedos, women in designer heels that clicked against the marble floors. Conversations floated in the air, crisp with laughter and polite compliments. I stood quietly, eyes scanning the floral arrangements that trailed up the grand staircase. White lilies, of course. Delaney always liked symbolism, especially when it made her look innocent. A young woman in a black headset approached me with a clipboard and a rehearsed smile. Miss Whitmore, welcome. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your table. I nodded and followed, my heels soft against the carpeted hall as we passed, the glittering ballroom entrance. I assumed my seat would be near the back. I wasn't naive. But when the attendant led me down a narrow corridor, past the main reception doors and toward a far corner near the emergency exit, I felt my stomach sink. Here you are, the woman said, gesturing toward a round table set for one. A single name card sat in front of an empty plate, Iris Whitmore. The table was tucked beside a coat rack and a glowing red exit sign. It was removed just enough from the main room to feel forgotten, but close enough to still hear the string quartet playing inside. The other tables were adorned with candles, gold-trimmed menus, crystal glasses. My table had none of it. I sat down slowly, adjusting the hem of my dress over my lap. I noticed it then. A small porcelain plate placed at the center of my setting. On it, a single piece of dry bread. No butter, no garnish, no explanation. I blinked. Surely it was a mistake. I looked around, searching for a server. Instead, I saw Evelyn. My mother glided toward me like a swan through still water, dressed in silver satin and pearls, her hair in a flawless chignon. She wore a smile that never quite touched her eyes. "Darling," Evelyn said, with syrup in her voice. "So glad you could make it. You look comfortable." I met her gaze but said nothing. Evelyn leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to remain inaudible to passers-by. "I see you found your place. With your career and freelance photography, I imagine this meal is rather appropriate. Simple, humble." Her hand gestured toward the bread like she was presenting a delicacy. "This is what you're used to, isn't it?" My jaw tightened, but I kept my face still. My mother stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. A few minutes later, the music shifted. Delaney appeared near the ballroom entrance in her custom wedding gown, a cascade of satin and hand-stitched lace. She was stunning, radiant, the picture of composed grace. The crowd inside erupted in polite applause. As the bride made her rounds, she eventually floated toward the far end of the corridor. When she reached my table, she tilted her head with the sweetness of someone offering condolences at a funeral. "Hello, big sister," Delaney said, her lips curling into a delicate smile. "You made it." "I did." Delaney glanced at the plate, then at the chair, then back at me. "Your dress? Charming. Very minimalist." There was a long pause. "You know," she added, lowering her voice, "I always admired how you managed to make everything look so affordable. It's a gift. You make even the most ordinary things look cheaper." I stared at her. "You've never really understood presentation, have you?" Still, I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my small handbag and slowly pulled out a small black USB stick. I didn't raise it in defiance, didn't wave it like a threat. I simply placed it in my lap, my thumb resting lightly on its smooth surface. Delaney's smile faltered for the briefest second. "Well," she said, her voice tightening, "enjoy the evening." I nodded. Delaney turned and walked back into the ballroom, her train catching briefly on the leg of a gilded chair before it snapped free. Left alone at my table beside the fire exit. I looked once more at the dry piece of bread on the plate before me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I turned my gaze toward the ballroom lights and waited. Not for food, not for conversation, but for the moment when silence would mean more than anything my family had ever spoken aloud. The coldness of that bread. It hadn't left my mind. Not its dryness, not the deafening silence that came with it. As I sat there alone near the fire, my fingers curled lightly around the small black USB in my lap. I felt the weight of a decision that had been days in the making, whether or not I would ever use what I had captured. And now, in the quiet just before the speeches, my mind drifted back to the night it all began to take shape. It was 3 weeks earlier, at the Langston family's private engagement party for Delaney and Jasper, hosted in the rooftop lounge of an elite hotel overlooking Boston Harbor. The event had been less a celebration of love and more a display of legacy. Delaney had insisted I bring my camera. Not as a professional, of course, she'd said with a breezy laugh. Just for a few candid shots to make Mom happy. I showed up with my smaller rig, more out of habit than obligation. I didn't want to make a scene, and I had long ago learned to choose my battles. Most of the night, I stayed in the corners, capturing blurred moments through glassware, children, chasing each other under the chandeliers, Jasper making polite rounds through guests who whispered his name like royalty. I knew how to be invisible, and I preferred it that way. My lens gave me cover. My silence gave me power. Toward the end of the evening, after most of the guests had moved to the open terrace to watch the fireworks, I wandered back into the empty lounge to adjust my camera settings. That's when I saw Delaney, alone near the bar, phone lit up in her hand, her expression drawn tight. She didn't notice me behind the glass column. I, instinctively raising my camera, adjusted the focus. Not to photograph, but to observe. Delaney was typing quickly, her brows furrowed, lips pressed. Then she paused, read something, and smiled. I couldn't see the full message, but as Delaney turned slightly, the screen came into view, just enough for my lens to catch a single line, before it disappeared. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not Jasper's. It was jarring, intimate, reckless. Delaney looked around, slipped her phone into her clutch, then headed toward the private elevator without a word. I hesitated only for a moment before following slowly, careful to stay out of sight. I had no intention of confronting her. I just wanted to know, to understand. The elevator doors closed behind Delaney and I took the stairs 2 floors down, exiting discreetly into the underground parking structure. I knew Delaney's car, the silver coupe our father had bought her for graduation. It sat alone at the far end near the hotel's rear entrance. I waited in the shadows, camera slung at my side, my breath shallow in the cold concrete air. Minutes passed. Then a black SUV pulled in and parked beside the coupe. The driver stepped out, a tall man in a fitted coat, clean-cut, confident. He looked familiar. Cole Maddox, one of Jasper's business contacts. If I remembered correctly, I'd seen him once at a charity function. Charming and far too smooth for his own good. Delaney got out of her car and walked straight into his arms. There was no hesitation, no pretense. The kiss was slow, deep, familiar. Not the thrill of a new affair, but something older, something worn in. I lifted my camera. I hadn't meant to, but my hands acted before my mind caught up. I switched to video mode and pressed record. I didn't zoom in. I didn't need to. It was enough to see what was happening, enough to remember. They talked briefly. Delaney laughed softly, brushing his coat lapel, and then they disappeared into the backseat of the coupe. The door closed behind them. I stopped recording. I stood still for another minute, not moving, then walked away without looking back. I never showed anyone the footage. I told no one. For days afterwards, I convinced myself it wasn't my place. Maybe Delaney had her reasons. Maybe it wasn't my job to ruin a wedding, no matter how cold the relationship between us had become. I kept the clip on a backup drive, unnamed, buried beneath a dozen folders of client work, until today. Until I arrived at my sister's wedding wearing a quiet, carefully chosen dress, only to be seated near an exit like a stranger. Until my own mother walked by and dismissed me with a smile as if she hadn't raised me. Until my sister, wrapped in white lace and self-importance, stood over me with the audacity to insult me to my face. Until the dry bread. That was when I knew. I didn't see it as vengeance. Not exactly. It wasn't rage that moved me. It was clarity. Years of being diminished, erased, laughed at. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a reckoning. And so, as the orchestra finished their final prelude and the sound of silverware clinked in distant rhythms beyond the door, I closed my hand around the USB in my lap. The one that contained not only the video from the garage, but another recording from the engagement party. My camera had picked up more than I realized that night. Words, smirks, voices, it was all there. And tonight, everyone would see it. The day after the wedding rehearsal, the city of Boston moved with the hum of early spring, barely warm but no longer frozen. I drove in silence toward the house I once called home. It was a pale blue colonial with stone steps and an iron gate, tucked into a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. The trees in the yard had started to bud, and the magnolia bush that Evelyn always boasted about was beginning to bloom. Some things, it seemed, hadn't changed. I had come with a simple intention, to speak privately with my father, Reginald. He had always been the quieter one, the one who didn't insult my dreams even if he didn't actively support them either. There was a chance, however slim, that he might listen, that maybe he didn't know everything, that maybe, just maybe, he could still be reached. Parking at the end of the drive, I grabbed my bag, phone, and camera, still with me from the wedding prep, and walked to the side entrance. I knew the door code. Evelyn never bothered to change it. Inside, the house smelled like polished wood and lavender oil. I paused by the entryway, hearing voices drifting from the sunroom. I was about to call out when I caught my mother's name, then my own. My steps slowed. "Don't worry," Evelyn's voice rang, calm and clipped. "I've already moved the house, the condo in Martha's Vineyard, and the legacy shares into your name. Reginald has no idea." "You're sure?" Delaney's voice followed. "Because after the wedding, I want things in motion fast. We can't afford for him to start poking around." "He won't," Evelyn said with conviction. "That man hasn't reviewed a financial document in 5 years. He still thinks our lawyer handles everything." There was the sound of a clink, perhaps a teacup on porcelain. Then, quieter but clear, Evelyn continued. "This is for us, for the women of this family. You've done more for our future with this marriage than Iris could have done in a lifetime with her little gallery shows." I felt my fingers tighten around the leather strap of my bag. Delaney gave a low laugh. "After I'm married, I'll be the one holding the pen. The accounts, the estate, the trust, everything. I'll make sure you're set, Mom. You can finally retire. No more pretending with Dad. No more coddling Iris. Let her stay in Brooklyn with her artistic life." Evelyn chuckled, a sound full of ice. "She won't last long. She's always been a phase, not a future." There was a long pause, broken only by the tapping of Delaney's fingers against glass. "Do you think she suspects anything?" she asked. "Suspect," Evelyn replied. "I doubt she's capable. She still thinks honesty means something. Poor thing probably thinks love and hard work are enough." This time both women laughed. Sharp. Certain. I didn't move. My breath had gone shallow and a dull throb built behind my temples. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, tapped the recording app, and quietly hit record. My hand trembled slightly, not from rage, but from the finality of it all. This wasn't just family cruelty. This was betrayal masked as legacy, theft in a silk dress. I could hear Delaney pacing now. "I don't even love Jasper," she said, more to herself. "But this is what power looks like. A Winston marriage. Mom, I'll be able to walk into any boardroom in Boston and have the room. You taught me that. Align yourself with advantage. Leave feelings at the door." "Exactly," Evelyn said, her voice filled with pride. "You learned well." "And Iris," Delaney added with a dry edge. "She's just background, like wallpaper. We keep her around so no one accuses us of being heartless. But after the wedding, I say we cut the polite act." "I agree," Evelyn said smoothly. "No more invitations, no more forced holidays. She'll fade and will flourish." I blinked back the sting in my eyes, not from their words, but from the brutal honesty of it all. It wasn't jealousy. I felt. It was clarity. My mother and sister weren't merely thoughtless. They were architects of deceit. This wasn't just about Delaney's affair. This was about rewriting inheritance, silencing voices, and erasing anyone who didn't serve their narrative. I watched the recording meter tick upward, 1 minute, 2, 3, until the conversation began to drift to brunch menus and honeymoon details. Then I slowly backed away, retracing my steps toward the side door. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the weight of the betrayal yet. That would come later. For now, I had a recording, and soon they'd have an audience. The ballroom shimmered with light as the orchestra finished its gentle interlude. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables dressed in white silk and gold-trimmed menus. Wait staff moved in quiet choreography, refilling champagne glasses and clearing empty dessert plates. The air held that peculiar stillness just before formalities resumed. At the head table, Jasper stood and raised his glass with a broad smile. His father, Douglas Langston, stood beside him. The elder Langston, a man with a politician's voice and a banker's restraint, addressed the crowd with ease. "To family," Douglas said, pausing to let the clink of glasses echo in the silence. "To the joining of two legacies, to the future of Jasper and Delaney. May their union be as enduring as their names." Applause followed, warm and practiced. Then the MC returned to the microphone, flipping through a small stack of note cards. "Before we conclude the evening, we have one final toast. A special message from the bride's sister, Iris." There was a brief shuffle of surprise in the room. Delaney's smile faltered for the first time that evening. Evelyn, seated 2 seats away, stiffened slightly. I stood calmly. My emerald green dress, simple yet dignified, caught a soft glint beneath the ballroom lights. I held no glass, no notes. Walking toward the front with slow, deliberate steps, I turned to face the guests. I appreciate the opportunity, I began, my voice clear and even. But I won't be offering a toast tonight. A murmur. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. I'm not here to offer blessings or rehearsed sentiment, I continued. I came with something else, something more honest, something overdue. Delaney straightened in her seat. What is she doing? She whispered harshly to Evelyn. I held up a small black USB drive between my fingers and handed it to the technician near the stage. I'd like to share a video, I said simply. Please play it. The lights dimmed. The screen descended behind the head table. The room shifted from polite curiosity to restrained tension. I turned and stood to the side, my hands folded calmly in front of me. The first scene flickered to life. Delaney standing in the shadows of a parking structure, her coat draped over her arm, phone glowing in the dark. The message she read lit up in silence, blown up on the screen. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not Jasper's. Gasps scattered through the room. Then came the footage, grainy but clear enough, of Delaney and a man stepping into the back seat of her car, arms wrapped, lips locked. Some guests turned away. Others stared, frozen. Jasper sat unmoving, his knuckles white against the tablecloth. The scene shifted. This time, audio played. Evelyn's voice echoed through the speakers, precise and chilling. I've already moved the house, the vineyard property, and the shares into your name. Reginald has no idea. Delaney replied with a bitter chuckle. After the wedding, everything's mine. You can retire, Mom. I'll take it from here. From the shadows of the crowd, Reginald Harrison rose slowly, his eyes locked on the screen. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Delaney stood suddenly. Turn it off now. Her voice cracked in panic. That's private. This is doctored. This is slander. But the video played on. Evelyn's laughter joined Delaney's. The sound of greed disguised as maternal pride. A blueprint for betrayal, drawn out for all to see. Then, before the screen faded, a final voice echoed into the darkened ballroom. That's enough, said a familiar voice. But it wasn't from the speakers. All heads turned as Cole Maddox, dressed in a dark suit, stepped forward from the side entrance. Real, present, not a recording. He moved toward the front of the ICA room with calm precision. Delaney's eyes widened in disbelief. Her complexion drained of all color. What are you doing here? Cole ignored her. He turned to the guests, to Jasper, to the Langston family, to everyone watching. I was invited to the engagement party, he said. I didn't know I was part of a game. She said it was one last night, nothing more. His voice remained steady. But it became clear that I was just another tool. A man used to hurt another. I had a feeling she'd twist the story, so I recorded our conversations. I have everything. Every message, every plan. Delaney began to shake her head furiously. He's lying. He's obsessed with me. Cole looked at her for the first time that evening. Delaney, I loved you once, briefly. But what you did? To your sister, your father, your fiancé? He turned to Jasper. You deserve the truth, not a performance. The screen went black. The lights returned. The ballroom remained silent, and in that silence, the truth finally stood taller than the decorations, the wealth, or the reputation they'd all fought to maintain. Jasper Langston didn't move for a moment. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides as the last echo of Cole Maddox's voice faded from the speakers. The wedding ballroom stood utterly still, as though the ornate chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Delaney had stopped crying, though her face was stained with blackened mascara, and her body hunched as if trying to hide from a world that had suddenly turned its back. Evelyn sat beside her, lips pressed into a bloodless line, eyes darting, across the room like a cornered animal. And then Jasper stood. He didn't look at Delaney. He didn't look at the crowd. Instead, he reached slowly for his left hand and removed the platinum band he had placed on his finger not 2 hours ago. Holding it between his thumb and forefinger, he stared at it for a long moment. "I love to lie in a white dress," he said quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but it rang out across the ballroom like a final bell. He placed the ring down gently on the linen-covered table and turned to his parents. Douglas Langston and his wife Elizabeth had remained composed during the entire, scandalous unfolding. But now, the steel in Douglas's jaw had hardened. He stood beside his son, tall and grim, and turned his eyes toward Evelyn Whitmore. This marriage, he said, was not just a personal union. It was a business alignment, one we considered sacred. But deceit is not a value we do business with. Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but Douglas cut her off with a sharp glance. As of this moment, the Langston Group withdraws from all pending and proposed partnerships with Whitmore Holdings. Effective immediately, any outstanding negotiations are null. The words hit harder than anything I had said or shown. Gasps broke from the lips of several guests who worked in finance or society circles. They knew what this meant. The Whitmore name would take a fall, not just socially, but financially, and fast. Delaney collapsed into her chair, hands covering her face. Jasper, without a word, turned and walked away from the table, his mother following quietly, her hand on his shoulder. And then Evelyn broke. "This is your fault," she screamed, rising so quickly her chair tipped behind her. "You!" She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me. "You orchestrated this circus. You ruined my daughter's wedding. You destroyed everything we built." But the crowd was no longer listening. Guests had begun to rise from their seats, collecting their purses, their coats, their dignity. Conversations murmured like wind in the trees, soft, swirling, but unmistakably moving in one direction. "She deserves better," one woman whispered as she passed me. "I had no idea Delaney was like that," a man muttered to his wife. "No wonder Iris never came to the holidays." No one looked at Evelyn. "Sit down," she barked at no one. "This isn't over." Her voice cracked again, hoarse and shrill. "Do you know who we are? We are the Whitmores." No one answered. The orchestra had long stopped playing. The only sound was the rustle of dresses, the scrape of chairs, the slow echoing footsteps of guests who had seen enough. I stood still, my hands calmly at my sides. My eyes focused on nothing in particular. The silence felt heavier now, not out of shame, but out of finality. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. From the far end of the room near the now darkened video screen, Reginald Harrison remained seated. He hadn't spoken a word since the video played. His tie was loosened, his eyes unfocused. But as the guests emptied the ballroom and the Whitmore name collapsed beneath the weight of its secrets, he finally turned to look at me. Our eyes met. He didn't speak, didn't offer comfort, apology, or anger. Just a long, unreadable stare from a father who had just realized he'd built his family legacy on sand. And I, though I said nothing either, knew one thing clearly now. The fall had begun. The ballroom had emptied out, leaving only the faint scent of white roses and spiced candle wax lingering in the air. Servers moved quietly through the ruins of what had once been a picture-perfect wedding, clearing half-finished glasses of champagne and untouched slices of cake. In the distance, Evelyn's voice had long since fallen into silence, either from exhaustion or disbelief. Delaney was nowhere to be seen. I remained near the stage, my green dress now slightly wrinkled, my face still composed, though my soul trembled with everything that had just unraveled. I hadn't noticed the woman in the dark burgundy coat until a voice called my name, soft but firm. Iris Harrison. I turned, startled, to see a figure I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Sylvia Renner stood tall, composed, her silver-gray bob neatly in place, her black gloves still held in one hand as if she'd just arrived from an art auction. She did not wear the awkward smile of a social guest, but the direct, appraising gaze of someone who had seen something they didn't expect. "Sylvia?" I said, barely masking my surprise. "I didn't know you were here." "I wasn't invited," Sylvia replied with a wry smile. But someone close to me was. Word travels fast in art circles, especially when chaos is dressed in silk and scandal. I wasn't sure what to say. The last time we had spoken, Sylvia had delivered a rejection with her signature grace. Your technical skills are sharp, she'd said at the time. But I don't feel the soul in your work. I need rawness, something that dares to hurt. It had stung, even though I had nodded respectfully and thanked her. Now Sylvia looked around the disheveled ballroom. I saw the video, she said, without preamble. I stood in the back, watched the whole thing. I lowered my eyes. That wasn't supposed to be art. Sylvia's voice was quiet, but carried the kind of certainty that made people stop walking. It was. Whether you meant it or not, it was art. Raw, painful, the kind of truth you can't curate. You didn't just expose their lies, you exposed yourself, your pain, your strength. That takes more than talent. It takes conviction. I blinked, momentarily speechless. 2 years ago, I finally said, you told me my work was too polished, too distant. I did, Sylvia said simply. And I was right. Then there was a beat of silence between us. And now? I asked, not confrontational, just open. Sylvia stepped forward. Now I'm looking at a woman who no longer hides behind composition and technique. I saw truth on that screen, and I want to show it to the world, if you're willing. I tilted my head, unsure whether I was imagining this offer. I want to curate a solo exhibition, Sylvia continued, her voice warm but firm. Your first, a full collection. We'll call it Behind the Curtain, Portraits of Truth. Not just the wedding, everything. The absence in your childhood, the invisibility in your family, the reclamation of your voice. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Of all the things I had prepared myself for after that night, the backlash, the blame, the shame, this was not among them. A door had opened in the middle of the ashes. You're serious? I said softly. Sylvia met my eyes. I don't waste time chasing flukes. What you showed today wasn't a moment. It was a culmination. And it deserves a stage. For a moment, I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the far end of the room where my father still sat alone, head bowed. The room no longer held me, not as a place of rejection, nor as a memory of pain. Now it was simply a space I had passed through on my way to something more. I turned back to Sylvia. When do we begin? I asked. Sylvia smiled. We already have. The early morning light of Brooklyn carried a different kind of clarity than Boston's cold grandeur. Here the sun filtered through the windows of my modest new studio, warming the exposed brick walls and casting gentle patterns across the polished wood floor. I had signed the lease only a week after returning from the wedding, moved by an urgency to start again, not just in geography, but in spirit. The space was small, but it was mine. A corner was set up with backdrops and lighting, my cameras arranged with methodical care. A secondhand coffee machine hissed, filling the room with the earthy scent I'd always associated with quiet focus. On the wall opposite the entrance, I hung 3 photographs, portraits taken in moments no one thought I was watching. One showed a child with mud-streaked cheeks laughing in a Bronx park. Another, an elderly woman on a bench, hands folded in prayer. And the last, unfinished yet, was a close-up of my own reflection, shadowed by the sunlight cutting through my window. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At first, the phone barely rang. Walk-ins were rare. Those who did inquire often paused awkwardly, eyes flickering with recognition, as if trying to place me. Some whispered. One client, after an initial booking, canceled with a vague message. Some things came up. I didn't need to ask. I knew the story had spread farther than I imagined. Not the art, at least not yet, but the scandal. The viral headlines, Woman exposes cheating sister at wedding in front of 200 guests. News blogs latched onto it. Social media platforms flooded with opinions. Some applauded my bravery, others called me vindictive. There was even a podcast episode titled Family Secrets and Public Screens, The Iris Harrison Incident. It was surreal and not always flattering, but I had made peace with that. Sylvia checked in weekly, encouraging me to focus on the upcoming exhibition. "Let the noise settle," she said. "It always does, and then your work will speak." And it did. The first real break came when an editor from Art Perspective Quarterly reached out for an interview. Not about the wedding, but about my series of photos titled Unseen. I hesitated, wondering if it was just another angle to sensationalize my story. But the editor surprised me. "What interests me," he said, "is the empathy in your lens. It's not just what you show, it's what you reveal by not looking away." Shortly after the article published, a quiet shift began. A retired jazz musician called to ask for a portrait. Then, a mother of 3 from Queens booked a session for her family's first photograph in 10 years. A small but respected art blog listed Iris as one to watch in 2026, noting her documentary eye and honesty without the coldness of objectivity. My calendar began to fill, not rapidly, but steadily. And more importantly, the people who came wanted to be seen by me, not just photographed. They came because they had heard that Iris didn't edit away the wrinkles or stage perfection. She captured moments, truths, the kind that stayed long after the shutter clicked. One evening, as I reviewed raw files from a shoot, my phone buzzed with a message from Sylvia. "Final gallery specs approved. Opening date set. Ready to show them?" I smiled. I glanced again at the photo of myself on the wall, half shadowed, half lit. Then I turned back to my work, my fingers steady on the keyboard. I wasn't hiding anymore. The new chapter hadn't arrived with a parade or an apology. It had crept in, quiet and certain, like light through an open window. And it felt like home. In the days following the wedding, the Whitmore name became something of a cautionary tale in the upper circles of Boston society. What had once been whispered admiration turned swiftly into loud disapproval. And Evelyn Whitmore, once the queen of chamber music luncheons and art fundraiser galas, found herself without a single invitation. It began with a cold silence. Calls she had grown accustomed to, weekly updates from event organizers, casual brunch confirmations, simply ceased. Then came the pointed removals. Her name was discreetly erased from the board of the Women's Heritage Society. A polite but firm letter arrived, expressing that, in light of recent family matters, the board had voted unanimously for her resignation. The Boston Evening Register printed a subdued but damning piece about the implosion of a once-admired socialite dynasty. Her longtime friend and social confidant, Helena Montgomery, refused to return any of her messages. Even her hairdresser canceled their standing Thursday appointments. She had always taught her daughters that appearances were everything, but no tailored dress or polished accent could shield her now. The video was everywhere, not just the betrayal, but the gleeful cruelty caught in Evelyn's voice, speaking about Iris as if she were a stain on fine linen. It wasn't just scandal, it was evidence of character, and society was quick to turn away. Meanwhile, Reginald Whitmore faced the kind of blow that bruised more than ego. It cracked foundations. 3 major real estate development contracts were suddenly withdrawn. One from a longtime investor based in Connecticut cited uncertainty in leadership values. Another, a resort firm in Cape Cod, pulled out during final negotiations, stating a need to protect its brand. He tried to control the fallout, but the whispers followed every meeting. Isn't he the father? Wasn't that his daughter? What made it worse was the silence from his own household. Evelyn barely spoke, lost in her own storm of embarrassment and disbelief. And Delaney? Delaney had disappeared from the house entirely. When she finally called him, her voice was hollow. "I need help," she said, and he barely recognized her. Delaney had always been the golden one, the pride of the family, the beautiful face of their ambition. But her fall was sharper than either of her parents anticipated. Jasper had not only ended the engagement publicly, but refused to answer any further calls. His mother, Sylvia Langston, issued a swift and scathing press statement clarifying that the Langston family had no ongoing or future affiliations with the Whitmores. The jewelry firm that sponsored Delaney's last campaign dropped her overnight. Modeling agencies ghosted her. Her agent refused to return calls. She still had her condo, still had her wardrobe, still had her high heels. Until she checked her private savings account, the one she had created with Cole, the one that was supposed to hold enough to start over in case things with Jasper went south. The balance was zero. She blinked in disbelief and tried to log in again. Still zero. When she called Cole's number, it went straight to voicemail. The last message she'd received from him just a few weeks earlier had said, "Relax, beautiful. After the wedding, we'll be set." Now his social media had vanished. His apartment was empty. No mutual friends had heard from him. In a quiet, sterile moment inside her empty condo, she sat on the floor, shoes still on, and stared at the phone in her hand. Her mascara had long since smudged, her breath shallow, her thoughts darting toward something she had never dared imagined. She had been played. She had played everyone, her fiancé, her family, even Iris. But in the end, the one person she thought she could control had turned out to be playing her all along. She didn't cry, not at first. But as the hours wore on and her messages to Cole remained unread, the shock twisted into something darker. Her empire built on manipulation, and beauty had crumbled in a single weekend, and there was no one left to help her pick up the pieces. Back in Boston, Evelyn stood at her kitchen window, stirring a cup of tea she wouldn't drink. Her reflection in the glass looked older, smaller somehow. She had once ruled over charity auctions and tea parties, but now the silence in the room was heavier than any social defeat. She had no gallery opening to attend, no press luncheon to host, no daughter to boast about. All she had was a story playing over and over in the minds of every person who had once admired her, a story she couldn't rewrite, and a truth she couldn't silence. The Whitmore name had not just fallen, it had imploded. I didn't destroy a wedding. I revealed a truth that had been hidden behind designer gowns, family photos, and hollow speeches for decades. What you just witnessed wasn't revenge. It was liberation. And not just mine. Because maybe someone watching this has eaten the same dry bread. Maybe you've been pushed to the side, told to smile and stay quiet. Maybe you've wondered if speaking up is even worth it. It is. The silence that followed my video wasn't just shock. It was the sound of truth echoing in a room that never expected it. And that's why this story matters. If you stayed until the end, I want to ask you, what would you have done in Iris's shoes? Because next week we're diving into another family, another secret, and another woman who refused to stay silent. This isn't just storytelling. This is vindication. And you're going to want to see what's coming next. The rain came in sheets that afternoon, washing the Brooklyn streets in a cold, steady rhythm. Inside the studio, I stood at the sink, rinsing developer trays while soft jazz played from the radio. The studio smelled of chemicals, coffee, and quiet. It was a rhythm I had grown to appreciate. Days that moved without drama, without anyone demanding more than I was willing to give. I had just returned from hanging 3 framed prints in the gallery window when the knock came. A soft tap, then again, and then a pause, like the person on the other side was reconsidering. I dried my hands and walked to the door, unsure if it was a courier or perhaps a student from the community class I had begun teaching on Saturdays. But when I opened it, the air shifted. Delaney stood there, drenched. Her hair clung to her face, and the designer coat she wore looked soaked through, hanging off her frame like a weight she could no longer carry. She didn't speak at first. She just stood with her hands at her sides, raindrops trailing down her cheeks, some indistinguishable from tears. I didn't move. I held the door, but didn't widen it. "I came," Delaney said, her voice hoarse, from either crying or the cold. I didn't know where else to go. Brooklyn traffic passed behind her, indifferent. Inside the studio's warmth waited, but I made no gesture. "Why now?" I asked, my voice steady. Delaney's lip trembled. She looked down at the wet sidewalk as if searching for words in the cracks of the concrete. Then she met my eyes. "Because I have nothing left to lie for." The sentence hung in the air, fragile and final. I studied my sister's face. The makeup was minimal, smeared. The eyes weren't pleading the way they used to when she wanted something. They were tired, stripped. I'm not asking for anything, Delaney added quickly. I need to work. I need something real. I can clean. I can run errands. You don't even have to look at me. I stepped back from the door just enough to let the possibility of entry exist. You clean, you don't talk, you start from zero. Delaney nodded as if she had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times. I understand. I turned and walked back inside, leaving the door ajar. Delaney followed, shedding her coat near the door, her shoes leaving water spots on the floor. She looked around the studio, eyes passing over the prints, the lights, the order I had created. She didn't touch anything. I handed her a mop. Start there. Delaney took it without question and began in the far corner. She didn't ask. About pay. She didn't ask for a towel. She moved quietly, head down, water pooling near her feet as she worked. I returned to my desk, picked up my editing tablet, and resumed reviewing images. Outside, the rain softened into a drizzle, but the air in the studio remained still and thick with something unsaid. Forgiveness had not arrived. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, but consequences had, and with them, the first faint shadow of change. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation, the clink of champagne glasses, and the slow footsteps of patrons moving from photograph to photograph. Portraits of Truth had drawn a larger crowd than anyone anticipated. Art critics mingled with collectors, curious locals with seasoned curators. I stood near the far wall, just out of the central spotlight, watching rather than basking. Each piece had been carefully chosen, faces lined with time, hands folded in grief, smiles cracked in mid-recovery. No false lighting, no perfect angles, just people as they were. My favorite piece hung near the exit, titled Uninvited Light, a portrait of an elderly man sitting alone by a window. It had already been tagged, sold. Sylvia Renair approached me with a quiet nod. You've started something, Iris. Something honest, raw, needed. I nodded, not out of pride, but recognition. I had spent most of my life trying to be seen. Now, people didn't just see me, they saw through my lens. Near the center of the gallery, a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Iris. I turned. Jasper Langston stood a few feet away, holding a wine glass he hadn't touched. His suit was simpler than the one he had worn on what should have been his wedding day, but his posture remained upright, gracious. I didn't expect you, I said. I know. He offered a small smile. But I needed to say something. You saved me, without knowing it. I didn't reply, but the look in my eyes softened. I don't think I ever truly loved Delaney, he continued. I think I loved the idea of her, of who I was supposed to be with. He paused. Watching your video, seeing the truth, it felt like being dragged out of a dream, and I woke up a freer man. I gave a faint nod. There was no need for more. He didn't linger. Your work is powerful, Iris. I hope you never stop. And with that, he moved on, vanishing into the crowd. Later, as the evening waned and the final guests filtered out, I stepped near the glass entrance to breathe. The city glowed beyond, wet streets reflecting gallery lights, passing taxis, muffled laughter from the bar across the avenue. That was when I saw her. Evelyn. She stood beneath the awning across the street. No umbrella, no entourage. Her posture was still proud, chin lifted slightly, but her expression was unreadable. She didn't wave, didn't approach, just watched. We stood like that for a long minute. Two women, connected by blood, divided by everything else. The mother who never praised, and the daughter who no longer waited. I didn't call out. I simply reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the camera I always carried. With practiced hands, I adjusted the focus, capturing the image of Evelyn from behind glass and rain, framed by silence and the distance we had both chosen. Later, when I uploaded the image, I gave it no title at first, just a timestamp. But before printing, I added a small caption at the bottom corner. Sometimes silence says enough. And so the girl who once sat alone at family dinners, who was handed a dry piece of bread at her sister's wedding, didn't just survive the shame. She turned it into art, into truth, into liberation. I didn't need to scream or fight or beg for love. I simply showed the world what was real, and that was enough. If you made it to this point, then maybe, like Iris, you believe that silence can be powerful, that truth doesn't need permission, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals can become the clearest mirrors. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the black sheep in your own family? Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.